Good evening, everybody. Today we are speaking to Phil Craig, who is the leader of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, a single issue pressure group designed to bring independence to the Western Cape. Anything to add to that, Phil?
No. Well, apart from that, I'm just one of the founders. I'm not the leader, but but thank you very much for having me. Nevertheless,
just the public spokesperson, then, should we say?
the face.
All right. Yeah. No. So, how did you end up becoming the face of it? Because you're you're an Englishman originally.
Sure. And I'm not quite sure how it happened. I think it was a decision that was put off. We were busy with so many things when we were forming the organisation, getting the content right and the website and lots of different things, and then suddenly we had an interview and we had to rally around and decide who it was that was going to speak, and it ended up being me. And actually, there was a fair bit of, can we really put an Englishman onto the show to talk about Cape Independence? So there was a degree of nervousness all round. But ultimately, we pressed ahead, and it seems to have been fine.
Yeah, no, I think everyone's sort of taken it okay. They haven't brought it up yet, although I think a lot of people have got this sort of gut feeling that particularly the association with colonialism and everything, that that might come into play. What do you think about that particular issue?
Well, look, they brought it up rather a lot, actually. So you may just have missed it. So no, it's been pointed out. But I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's like everything. You know better than I that in the political space, your opponents will seek to use any leverage they can, and we just laugh it off. I have to just laugh it off. I mean, what's the typical response would be? Listen, at the end of the day, you weren't even born here. What's it got to do with you? And it's such a ridiculous situation, because we obviously we're pushing for well, apart from anything else, I've been here for 16 years, and I married a South African, and I have South African children, so I'm pretty well invested. But beyond that, the whole point of Cape Independence is that it has to be a referendum of which the majority of 3.1 million voters get to vote. So, well, really, I am quite insignificant in that whole process as a voter. So if everybody else isn't convinced, then it doesn't really matter what my accent was.
Yes, one of the benefits of what you're getting at, you're not a political party, you're not running for office, you're at the moment just pressing the single issue and trying to gain a bit of ground for it. How do you sort of come to the position of taking that as a single issue platform?
Well, look, then I have to speak personally, because I guess as an organisation, different people follow different routes. But for me personally, there was a certain logic. I'm probably one of these boringly, real pragmatist, logical souls who tends to not be too emotional about certain issues. And I always saw Cape Independence as the absolute logical counterpoint to African nationalism. It was kind of inevitable that in a land, the more African nationalist South Africa became, the less attractive that would become to the West, where the majority of people would be expressed disadvantaged by that. So it always felt that it was a logical counterpoint. And then as African nationalism rose, funnily enough, it didn't really kick off. And funnily enough, Cape Independence didn't really attract the level of attention that I had expected it to. And then as an individual, I eventually decided to get involved, and how much you want to be bored with the details, whether or not I'm not a particularly.
The more boring details, the better.
Well, it'll be an interesting one. So I'm broadly speaking agnostic. I would like to be a Christian. I often, over a long time, described myself as a Christian, and I reached a point in my life where I realized I had probably too many doubts to be able to genuinely say, listen, I'm sort of devoutly Christian. So I'm somebody who wants to believe, but I always want to see evidence. And I always say,
Okay.
that Thomas was my favorite disciple, because I kind of want to see the holes in the hand and so on too.
Yes.
And so but actually but I want to believe, I really want to believe, and let's see, I call me a seeker. But for Cape Independence to be the final moment was actually in a church. I was in the Engia Church in Wellington, actually.
The mother church in Kerkstraat.
The mother church in Kerkstraat, yeah. And on the first occasion, the Dominie there, Benny van Rensburg, was preaching, and Benny is my favorite preacher in terms of that he's very political, which I always found quite amusing when I first found myself in an Engia church. But fabulously so. It really is an enjoyable soul. So he was preaching that listen, the country's in a mess, and we all know it's in a mess, and it's quite right that we all come to church and that we all pray for a better future, and we for the country to have stewardship and all of the things that good Christian souls would want. But then he also then pointed out that beyond that, people were expected to get their bums out of the pews between Sundays and actually go and make that happen, and it wasn't fine to just to sit there and to pray about it and then do nothing in between. You actually are required to do something yourself. And it probably wasn't quite as blunt as that, but and for somebody who already was attracted and I guess had wanted to get involved in Cape Independence, but I'd also felt that it wasn't my place. I was as you've seen, I was British, I was white, I was it wasn't really for me, and there were lots of reasons to say, well, this shouldn't be me to do this. And I guess on that day I thought, well, gosh, okay, maybe it is me, and that actually kind of resonates with me, and I'm wanting to do something. So I kind of made the decision then, and I spoke to my wife, who was a much better Christian than I, and asked her, listen, there's going to be a lot of trouble coming along if I put my head above the parapet. And she said, look, you know what, you must just go and do it. And we were back in church about a month later, and another preacher had turned out to have a very similar message, and that kind of was the final affirmation. And we left, as my wife and I, and that was it. And then we decided to get involved in Cape Independence. So that's how it actually happened.
Oh, excellent. Well, you wouldn't be the only one. And your church wouldn't be the only church. I mean, as anyone will tell you, the churches in the 1980s were absolutely hot with politics. So it wouldn't be out of South African order, would it?
No,
but.
Likewise, in my family, interestingly enough, so my grandfather, most interestingly, was a Quaker who was sentenced to death in the First World War for refusing to fight. So, and he was shipped to France to be executed. Was reprieved on the morning of his execution, and spent the First World War in prison, and subsequently actually lived to the ripe old age of 99 and 8 months, and was a street preacher. So I think some forms of activism in our family. I'm not sure I'm as brave and as courageous as he was, but yeah, if I could be a fraction of the man, I'll be very happy.
No. So. Well, so then you have a lot to live up to, I suppose. But Wellington's an interesting town to get into active politics. It's been the seat of so many political movements over the ages. It was the seat of the Taalbeweging, of which members of my family going back were founding members. It was the seat that my great grandfather ran from, and his are the first words recorded in Hansard in the Parliament. And you've got the PAC were rounded up and put an end to in Wellington and Paarl there. So yeah, it's a very sort of central position for a lot of movements. It would be interesting. It would be interesting if Cape Independence got its first sort of burst of fire there. But I mean, it didn't really start with you. It started beforehand. What can you tell us about the organizations that were around before you got involved?
Well, look, there's an awful lot of organisations actually. I think underneath the surface, there's a lot more happening with Cape Independence than people would necessarily pick up from the news. I mean, there are a lot of the news titles that deliberately don't cover Cape Independence or have much to say about it. But I mean, essentially, the Cape Party, let's call the Cape Party the original instigators, and they came with the vision of Cape Independence, and they started to campaign, and obviously are still going. So and I think a lot of people don't understand the kind of this space. There's all of these organisations, and we always ask, why don't you work together? And of course, the answer is we do. We collaborate. We ultimately want very similar things. But we have we have different goals. We have different ways that we think we're going to get there, and ultimately we complement each other. We don't always complement each other face to face because of course we have differences of opinion. But I'm being a bit facetious. But we complement our activities. So the Cape Party are a political party, and they are seeking political power. They've been going now, I think, 13 years, and fair play to them. And then obviously you've got Cape Exit, who came along substantially later. They're a civic organisation. And they're pursuing essentially the legal route under international law, and for want of a better expression, we're a political lobby group, and whilst there's a bit more to it, we fundamentally want to pile pressure onto the provincial government of the Western Cape to either get behind Cape Independence or actually become neutral and to encourage the debate. And there's an understanding that it would be very, very difficult, perhaps even impossible, to have an independent Cape if you didn't get the government ultimately of the province to support you. So the three of us have sort of slightly different routes, and that's but we all complement each other. If the Cape Party win a couple of seats, that's fantastic for everybody. If Cape Exit, they up to now 550,000 mandates, which is fantastic. And obviously we've been very successful at getting Cape Independence in the news and doing the polling, and obviously a fair bit of political lobbying behind the scenes. And then there are lots of other little groups too. There's the Sovereign State of Good Hope. The ULA have done quite a bit of work. There is another group called My Independence, and then there's some Khoisan groups. So actually, once you get behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of people involved in this space.
No, that's wonderful. I've noticed, and I think a lot of people have noticed, that it's a very sort of strange constellation of groups, but I think that's kind of natural for the Cape. The Cape tends to be a lot more diverse than the rest of the country. But if you were to try and give a guide to someone who's on what are these groups like, and what are their different characteristics? Because I understand that the Cape Party focuses a lot on, they have a very particular idea of how they want the future constitution to look. Wexit has their own sort of ideas. There are a lot of ideas coming from the nativist groups. How would you sort of characterize the shape of the different parties within that little Cape nationalist ecosystem?
Well, like I said, I think broadly we're heading to the same thing. But there are differences. So yes. First of all, the Cape Party would probably be the most ideological of the groups, and to a certain extent, I think that's logical. Obviously they are, whilst they're sort of reluctant politicians, they're ultimately campaigning for political power. So if they win, they're going to have to execute a raft of policies. So therefore they probably have quite an extensive policy set. They're very committed to the sort of decentralization of power, and for the sort of cantonal system, Swiss federal system, and they campaign quite heavily for that. And where in contrast for a group like ours, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, we have no political positions at all. We say, listen, we confirm the borders, and we'll confirm who gets citizenship, because you have to know those things to decide whether you're supported or not. But beyond that, we are Democrats, and we we want the people of the Western Cape to elect their own government, and fundamentally for us, and I think for all the groups, clearly there's an issue that the Western Cape people don't get the government they voted for. So for us, that's what we want to correct. And whilst individually we'll have views on policies, as an organisation we don't. The Cape Exit, fun enough, kind of do a bit of both. They are a civic organisation, but they do have quite a lot of policy positions. And it's interesting for us. We're not averse to any of the policy positions. If I look at a lot of the things that both Cape Exit and Cape Party advocate for, personally, I don't find them offensive at all. In many ways, I find a lot of them attractive. Where I probably would differ from them is simply that the biggest hurdle to independence is achieving 50% plus one. Ultimately, you've got to win a referendum, and therefore I question the sense. Maybe that's a bit too hard a word, in having too many policies, because ultimately you end up dividing people, and you find people who would have wanted Cape independence, but they don't like this policy, or but they don't like that policy, and we just don't have that much fat, in terms of winning 50% plus one. That is always going to be a hurdle. People sometimes naively say, it'll be a walk in the park for a referendum. It'll be anything but a walk in the park. We're at 36% now, which is fantastic. We'll have to get to 50% plus one. If we can get to 51% or 52%, that will be a huge achievement. There won't be a 60 or a 70 or an 80% vote in support of Cape independence. That just isn't going to be how this thing pans out. And therefore, we need to have as broad a movement as we possibly can. And it can be that people from right across the political spectrum can collaborate and cooperate to get political power for the people of the Western Cape, even though they might have different views of how that political power should be exercised afterwards. And that's very much the case on the executive committee of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. That we have people from both left and right of the political spectrum. What we agree on is that the people of the Western Cape should be selecting their own government. We don't necessarily agree on who that government should be, and that's fine. I think that's healthy.
No, that's very sound. How would you characterize the commitment to these commitment from various political parties, for example? So I know that Vryheidsfront Plus has a lot of sympathy for the independence movement, and I know that the Cape Coloured Congress, small and new though they are, have made noises in that direction. How's their engagement been with you on these matters?
So look, so obviously, to a certain extent, we're a political lobby group, and our conversations with sort of senior politicians, are confidential. But broadly speaking, let's just say the Freedom Front are fully behind Cape independence, and they will be advocating for Cape independence in the 2021 elections in the Western Cape. So the Freedom Front are on board 100%. The Cape Party politically clearly are on board 100%. So there's two political parties. When it comes to the Cape Coloured Congress, Fardil Adams supports Cape independence. He says that they haven't yet voted as an organisation, so they haven't formally adopted the policy. But I think it's fair to say that they also support Cape independence. If you speak to Fardil, then his view of an independent Cape would be substantially different to, say, Corneille Mulder's version of an independent Cape, that will be an interesting dynamic as it plays out. Yes. The Cape Coloured Congress is heavily left of centre. It's all intents and purposes it's a socialist, a social nationalist party. Interesting allies. When it comes to the DA, it becomes even more complicated. The DA tries to never be pinned down too specifically on this. It's difficult to know what everybody personally believes. Obviously, we know a good number. We don't know all, but what we do know from this. So let's just think of the DA itself as a broad church, and clearly within the DA there are people who are vehemently opposed to independence, and there are people who are adamantly in support of Cape independence. At this point, the political space within the DA doesn't allow Cape independence to be openly discussed. Which
they're a very slick machine.
Yeah.
One thing that I would ask in that direction, now that you're mentioning the DA, is how do you think that John Steenhuisen being a Durbanite is going to affect your chances?
Well, John's. Look, I think I don't think anyone was really expecting anybody else to be leading the party apart from John. So since the formation of the CIAG, we've always been expecting that John would be the leader. I think clearly it's extra dynamic that's there. The DA is going to need to have the carrot and the stick to lead it to Cape Independence. There are people at every level of that organisation that are in support. We know from polling that 53% of Cape Independent of DA voters in the Western Cape want independence. We know that 65% of them want a referendum on independence. And obviously we know that the DA itself is going to be broadly representative of its own voters. So that can tell you brushstrokes how much support there is in there. Then I can confirm, having personally spoken to numerous people within the DA, that at every level there are supporters of Cape Independence. But it's you've got this coy situation where John has never. Well, he has made a couple of comments, but he hasn't spoken an awful lot of independence. When he hasn't spoken. If you'll forgive me for saying it, terribly intelligently. I don't know if that was because he was caught on was uninformed, or if actually he was kind of deliberately remains to be seen. But he wasn't terribly intelligently informed on the subject. And Alan Windy has had a different answer to Cape Independence every time I've heard him spoken. So he has a whole raft of and I think he must want to be a moving target on Cape Independence. Alan's an interesting one. He's firmly in favour of federalism. He was the person that proposed federalism at the over the weekend, which the DA have formally adopted now. And obviously, federalism and independence aren't so very far apart. But actually, whenever he's interviewed on independence, he's a fairly slippery eel. So my guess is he doesn't fancy independence. But I mean, ultimately, maybe this is a bit brazen, but we're not really expecting the DA to make up their mind in a vacuum. We intend to influence the DA at every twist and turn, and through people power, knowing that the majority of their own voters want independence. We intend to lead them by the nose to independence, and some of them will come willingly because that's what they want, and some of them will come dragging their heels, and I guess that's politics.
Very sound. But I think returning to local issues, more local issues, because the municipal elections are coming up. You live in Wellington. And from what one of the commenters said, that Wellington and Paarl are leaning very heavily for Cape Independence. So what would be your sort of projection, considering that as a political issue? How much do you think the small party could mop up in the Drakensberg next year, given that?
Well, okay, that's an interesting question. So we don't have, as an organisation, we haven't made any firm decisions around the 2021 municipal elections, and we'll leave it as long as we possibly can. There are all sorts of irons in the fire. And I think, let's say if I were a smaller party, I would definitely be looking to form an independence alliance, and I think it's entirely possible that there could be some kind of electoral pact between the Freedom Front and the Cape Party and the Cape Coloured Congress and whoever else. Clearly they could make independence an issue, and there has been a number of discussions about identifying candidates throughout the Western Cape in terms of who is supportive of Cape Independence and who isn't, and trying to isolate some of the DA candidates. And look, that potentially sounds attractive and has some benefits. One of the things that we'd have to balance that against as an organisation in the CIAG is even if we band those three and other parties together, they still have a very small percentage of the vote. And I guess it's the same old thing, isn't it? If you're going to shoot for the king, don't miss. And actually,
yes.
And if if we're going to take the DA on as electoral politics, it isn't going to help if we walk away with 3 or 4% of the vote. So I suspect now isn't really the time for us. I think we would rather focus on the DA. But if I were in the other parties, I'd feel differently, and I think it'll be useful, and I think it will start to be an issue. On the other hand, and I think when we chatted privately, we talked about this, and I don't think there's anything untoward for us saying, what one of the strategies that we're currently looking at, the DA has a federal structure. The Western Cape DA isn't run by Alan Windy. Alan Windy is the premier, but effectively his role is primarily administrative. The decision-making body in the Western Cape is the PEC, the Provisional Executive Council. And effectively, if we can convince the PEC to support independence in the Western Cape, then obviously Alan would then receive his instructions from the PEC. So as an organisation, it is quite critical for us that we get to the members of the PEC. So you talk about Drakensberg, Pearl and Wellington. Well, look, the DA doesn't particularly publicise who's on that list, but Conrad Poole, who is the executive mayor of Drakensberg, is on the PEC. Likewise, I think it's Antoinette, is it Bredel from Breda Rivier, is also on there. So one of the things that we certainly are looking at doing is launching a localised campaign in the Drakensberg. We're trying to raise funds at the moment to do that, so that we specifically can isolate the likes of Conrad Poole. He's up for re-election next year in 2021, so we can make Cape Independence a really big issue locally. And obviously that's much more affordable for us, and that means that you can imagine, if we can raise the money, we can actually either unseat a DA mayor or have him formally support Cape Independence, or it would be significant for us. And it would be significant because then we move on to the next municipality if we can show to local government officials that actually we can make their own job security very bad. Then that will be very significant. So there are lots of things that we can do. And look, obviously, we respond constantly to the political climate, but they're the sort of things that as an organisation, the CIG, that we are working on. We obviously do a lot of stuff in the media, but we do a lot of stuff behind the scenes too.
Yes. One of the other things that of course, you're going to be doing as a lobbyist for this is trying to get international support. Now, I know that over here there's sporadic in the Netherlands. There's some sporadic sympathy for Cape Independence. Small, marginal, mostly political nerds, but how's your success been with talking to European representatives?
We're not at that stage yet, so we haven't, is the honest answer. So therefore, we haven't had any success. What we have had is a number of doors open. So we're sitting with invitations to come and speak to quite some very significant people. We understand what the bar is. We understand who we need to win over, and we have access to those people. So look, the CIAG is a small organisation. We're dependent on funding, and we at this point in time we all have full-time jobs. So this is a labour of love, and therefore we kind of have to deal with issues in a fairly linear way at the moment.
Yes, I can imagine plane tickets don't grow on trees,
No, and obviously, so you have to bite off what you can do. And look, we are talking to people, so I think that probably will change it. We're a relatively young organisation, and I think what we've achieved so far has been staggeringly successful. But so we got the whole thing into the media. We were very successful at that, and we still keep ticking over with that. we carried out the polling project, which was a lot of money, and we got some firm data that's now useful and established as credible. And actually, what we've moved on to now is we're busy with the first march. So now this will be the first time where we're looking to produce feet on the ground pressure, which is a whole different type of ramping up the pressure. So at this point in time, we've just got a ratchet strap, and we just ratchet, and obviously international support is something that's going to be critical, but it's not something that is a here and now issue. First of all, we have to concentrate on getting 50% plus one on the ground, and we have to get the provincial government of the Western Cape on board. So they are the first pressing issues, and obviously we would love. Look, if resources were no issue, we would start with the international lobbying now. And like I say, we have had discussions a lot. Yeah, a lot of people approach us and open doors for us, and we've got seats at those tables, which in many ways makes it slightly less urgent for us because we have access to all of the right people. But until we've got majority support in our own province, there's not much we can do with it anyway. But on the 5th of December, we'll be marching for Cape Independence, and that will be very significant, and will be the next sort of prod, if you like, and hopefully that will be a real step change for us as an organisation, and perhaps even Cape Independence as a movement too.
No, excellent. Well, that actually takes me to a question that we've got over here. Hold on, it's supposed to come up on the screen. There we go. So Riefrit says over here, do you guys plan to pass through the Cape Flats? I assume he means like visiting people and so on. On the ground, going to different municipalities and so on.
Sure.
Because you're going to need that support for the march, because obviously it's going to be in Cape Town. Not everyone can afford to come in from the little towns.
Sure. Well, funny enough, the first march isn't going to be in Cape Town.
Oh, really? Do tell.
Yeah. I guess I'm just going to guard my words because we are marching with a coloured community to one of the well, I think we can say so ultimately we're going to be marching in Stellenbosch, but we're not marching as Stellenbosch. We're marching on Stellenbosch, and we're marching with a coloured community, and the march will be in the name of the community. And the reason I'm being a little guarded is just out of respect. We've had a number of discussions. Actually, the community did a lot of work themselves on Cape Independence. They're very pro Cape Independence, and so they want to march. But I'm having a community meeting there tomorrow when we'll get formal permission. So I don't want to announce something until I've been formally given permission from the members of the community. But we're meeting with them tomorrow, which will be the 4th or 5th meeting. So our permits are in. And I think there are two reasons for that. I think first of all, this is the first march, and we want to cut our teeth on something where we can learn and work out the kinks in the system, and then we'll have a much bigger march on Cape Town probably the early part of next year. But also, one of the things that one of my colleagues coined the term devolved efforts. We're a small organisation. Yeah. And therefore, a lot of people come and say, "Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" And as a rule, we don't really have the money, we don't really have the resource, and actually, with the greatest will in the world, we don't need 500 people a week emailing telling us what they think we should do. Independence fundamentally is a people's movement. So when people come to us and say, "Listen, why don't you do that?" Our response tends to be, "Well, why don't you do that? And we'll help you." And therefore, when people arrive offering support for the organisation, then and that's what happened. And this particular community did an awful lot of work. They made a video on independence. They did a lot of work on the ground, and they're pro Cape Independence, and therefore it was fantastic as an opportunity for us to be able to support that. And actually, there's something truly symbolic about coloured people marching on Stellenbosch to demand of the DA mayor independence. It kind of pokes one in the eye for the whole white thing. Because ultimately for us it's critical people understand that the Cape Independence is about the people of the Western Cape getting political power, nothing to do with white privilege or in any way maintaining the past. It's about a better future.
I mean, we just had someone called Mansell Upham, who's a historian on the early Cape, quite a while ago, and he pointed out at great length how almost every major Afrikaans family has their roots in mixed race unions, and so the gradient between white and colored is a very slow one, and there's lots of admixture in between, and it's just the sort of the crude interventions from Pretoria's government the past 100 years that have really pulled us apart to that extent. And I think that sort of brings me to the next question in the chat, which is actually to what extent the colored community actually supports Cape Independence, but by your estimate, because I mean, the poll that you did is now a little bit old, and things have moved very quickly in Africa since then.
Sure. Yeah. Look, look at this point in time, I think it probably is the most accurate information we've got. I think there is, there will be movement, but I'm not sure enough has happened to fundamentally move the needle just yet. So we know, and the answer to that was 39%. 39% of Western Cape citizens who would describe themselves as coloured said they supported Cape Independence. And I think that represents a very sizable number. It represents the majority of Cape Independence supporters are actually coloured. But equally, it represents a number that's short of where we need it to be if we're going to carry a referendum. So it's one of the major focus areas. Look, it's difficult because obviously South Africa has this race thing, and it's naive to sort of not include race. But equally, we have to understand at the same point we're trying to get away from that whole nonsense. And it's exactly as you said, that actually it's crazy that we have these clearly defined boundaries when anything but clearly defined. I think it was Hissy, and it was in back in 18 whatever it was, who did the initial genealogy of Afrikaners and announced that at that point, 7% of Afrikaners were black, we have this intermixed, same as every country. I'm British, it's sort of laugh, I mean, British. What's British? I mean, at the end of the day, is that ancient British Celt? Is it Roman? Is it Norman? Is it Saxon? Is it Scandinavian?
I think it's one of those things that you sort of you know it when you see it, as the judges usually say about pornography. But yeah, no, we know. The boundaries can get very blurred, and I think, regardless of race, we do know our own country, and we do have a sense for our own community and the little variations within it.
Sure.
And there's very much a sense, I think most people have, that you don't need to have a homogenous nation. The idea of these homogenous nation states are very much a sort of late 19th, early 20th century construction.
Sure.
And, people who tie themselves together traditionally don't have to be homogenous. They merely have to have allegiances and a common feeling.
Exactly. As soon as you define something, then your definitions are outdated, because in any group, in the day, there is no definition, and actually that's why it's so important to just understand that the Western Cape independence is ideological in nature. It's not racial in nature. It's the fact that the people of the Western Cape do not want the government they've got and the policies that it's bringing in, but it's having the government and those policies forced upon them. And for those that say that that's democracy, it's not. Democracy means there must be some prospect of winning. There must be some change of government. There must be, it may be that at this point in time, but actually, if you're in a situation where for 26 years you've never got what you wanted, and actually there is no point in the foreseeable future where you will ever get what you wanted either, and whilst that's happening, that fundamentally the territory is going to change to such an extent that people's language and history and culture is going to be wiped out in the process, then clearly, that is not a democratic issue, and therefore we have
it's like the Messiah Tibet.
Your history is infinitely better than mine, so I normally listen when you start talking about history.
Oh well, that's a flattering comment. I've got nothing on Mansell Upham though. That man is very serious. I might have to have him back on again. Actually, he was very he got a lot of very positive feedback. I enjoyed talking to him as well. Fascinating man. But I mean, I think with the Cape, actually with South Africa in general, history is such an enormous thing because I think we're right now going through a period where the whole community has been quite consciously been redefining itself, often top down, and it involves a lot of revisionist history. It involves a lot of selective history. Sure. How has your sort of feeling about South African history affected your understanding of the situation?
So look, like I say, I clearly have read a fair bit. I probably know less about South African history than many other people. I know more than enough to understand that it's utterly selective, and obviously there's just glaring omissions, and I find it sad. So I am somebody who inherently, in any case, sees that everybody's value is derived from the here and now. So therefore, I believe that we all are people who are worthy of respect and worthy of opportunity. And therefore, if we're going to look at South Africa and say that this is an unfair situation and we need to remedy these inequalities or these injustices, I'm 100% behind that. But we must remedy them upon the basis that what's happening now is unjust. As soon as we start dialing back history, it just becomes it becomes farcical. And obviously, in South African history, it is. And so I probably end up anecdotally, but I mean, my favorite one, of course, is that obviously we know 1652 is a fairly pivotal date. Where the first settlers came, and then we had the 1820 settlers. But of course, the 1838 migration of the Ndebele from South Africa into Zimbabwe found that those people would be then indigenous. So you have this ridiculous situation that 1652 settler, and that would just be one of many examples. The whole notion of removing street names in one part of the country while you're naming them after other people at the other end. King Shaka Airport.
No, but it's a very sort of typical rule of thumb that everyone uses, where conquest and migration are okay as long as you don't cross any bit of water in between. Which I find a little bit teeth grinding.
The only difference, again, the only difference by race is in terms of history, regardless of who we are, whether we're Boer or Brit or Xhosa or Zulu. The only difference in history was defined by who had the biggest gun. We were all the same people. We were all savage. We all conquered by might. And actually, whoever happened to have the greatest power at the time is now the one that's perceived as evil. But we were fundamentally all the same. We're all human beings, and we all behave fundamentally in the same way.
Yeah, and so I think there's another question. Speaking of human nature, this is a point that I like. I'm going to partially answer this question as I bring it up. Right, I'll over to you. But so come on, software. There we go. It says, what will we do after we've gained independence? And I think if I may anticipate, and I hope Damien Thomas here won't think I'm mischaracterizing him too much, but there is amongst a lot of people when they ask this kind of question, is they imagine that there will be a new system that we'll set up and that will sort of fix all the problems. But as I see it, politics goes on. And I think a good question to ask, if just to play speculation, play Nostradamus for a bit, is how do you see things panning out after you get independence? What do you think the landscape will look like?
Well, so what do I think? Probably unpopular view. I think the providing it happens fairly quickly, and the political dynamics of the Western Cape haven't changed. I think we'll just carry on with normally the government that's in power for independence and liberates the country, let's say, carries on. My suspicion is, we're on our third straight term of a DA government. I suspect we'll end up getting a fourth term of a DA government, which will suddenly become the national government. And I don't think very much will change in terms of I think what will happen now is the government that's been elected will now have a chance to show its own policies. And I think then the people would quickly look and decide, well, hang on a second. Now, I think people are getting fed up with the DA. So I think then that will be a really interesting test.
Yeah. They might have to fight quite hard to hold on to their crown.
I think so, and rightly so. I think so. My guess is they'd get one term. If you had to say to me, I think they'd get one term, and now they've got now they have no excuses because they're implementing anybody else's policies. They're implementing their own. People would see. I think there is some argument that people would sort of float away from the DA because they're voting them to keep the ANC out. But I don't think that's as big as people think it is. What do I think will happen? Is it going to be some utopia with no problems? Of course it's not. We're still going to sit with millions of people living in absolute poverty. We're still going to have an unemployment crisis. We're still going to have all those issues. I think the difference is we're going to be in a situation where rather than making them worse on a year-by-year basis, we can start to make them better. And I think a realistic period of time in my mind is those are problems that we can fix over a 20-year period. We can start in year one and we can progressively get better and better and better. And I think we clearly are going to have challenges along the way. We're going to have lots of challenges along the way. But I think we're going to have a system that probably is broadly capitalist because that's what the people of the Western Cape want. I think we're going to continue to have a level of a social safety net, and I think that's absolutely right. I think we have to understand that the people living in poverty and in shacks, whatever, however uncomfortable it may be for many of us to drive past, they have it far worse than we do, and they're not there because they just want to make mischief. They're there because actually, you got to think when somebody's best option in life is to live in a shack, then things are pretty tough. And I hope we have a society that is compassionate and solves those issues, but solves those in a practical way. And I think one of the real tragedies of South Africa is that we have all of the ingredients. We're such a blessed country that we could solve our issues in a generation. We just have to do the right things, and we haven't. And I hope we get a government that will do the right things. So yeah.
I mean that sort of brings up the obvious question: is I think a better way to define where we would be after independence is to think about what's escaping, and how characterize the threat that the ANC poses to good governance in the Western Cape right now.
Sure.
And the EFF, of course, who are going to be their coalition partners next national election, almost certainly.
Well, they already are, aren't they? They might be. They already are. They're just the teeth. No, look, to be honest, we've talked about ideology, and absolutely, we fundamentally have those two ideologies. Obviously, in terms of South Africa, the majority of voters in South Africa want to have the socialist system that we have there, and obviously the ANC and the EF want to centralise. They want to have centralised power. They want to control the levers of power, and they're nationalists. Whatever we say or do, they're African nationalists. They don't want to chase white and coloured Indian people out of the country. But I mean, if you strip it away, they don't believe that we have this situation where South Africa belongs to all who live in it. That they believe that actually it's inherently part of Africa, and the minority groups are here under sufferance and must do as they're told.
Yes, I mean, it reminds me a lot of. I know this is a very crude comparison, but this was a very big feature of mid-century German rhetoric, which was that the other groups in Germany are guests; they're not Germans. Which it's a sort of language I've seen emerging quite a lot, where ethnic minorities are told in South Africa that they have to behave themselves or they will be shown what's for in sort of rather euphemistic terms usually, and sometimes not.
No, well, look, and I think clearly we've got this one ideology that's there, and I think the people of the Western Cape, we know from how they vote, that's not what they're voting for. The people of the Western Cape vote typically across colour lines in many cases. They vote for sensible governance, and whether they get it right or wrong, who knows? But I suspect they do. And I think that's going to be the difference between the Western Cape, and I think we ultimately will end up with an environment that is much more business friendly, and obviously economic growth, employment. I mean, clearly employment and education are the critical things they should be the critical things for South Africa. We know both are going backwards at a fair old rate, and they absolutely have to be the critical things for an independent Western Cape if we want to solve our problems. The solution stays the same. It's just that South Africa has no intention of carrying out the solution.
Yeah, no, it's very worrisome. I think Tito's recent budget has demonstrated that priority number one is patronage, and everything else comes after that. Which makes you think very much of the structural readjustment program in Zimbabwe in the 1990s, and we're heading towards that year 2000 sunset pretty rapidly.
Sure. No, look, and I think the most remarkable thing about the SAA bailout was not that the ANC capitulated, but that actually that Mboweni and that Gordon both had the audacity to complain that somehow they were being maligned and treated unfairly, because people were disgusted that they took money from the police in the country with 52 murders a day or 56 murders a day, and from the health services.
It's shocking. It's bloody shocking. It reminds me of what Thabo Mbeki did in 2003, where he cut the number of rural police stations in half and removed the commandos and all kinds of things like that. Where the ANC chooses to cut their budget tells you a lot about their priorities. I mean, I remember one thing that sticks out to me would be Makula's statement back in 2004. If you don't like the murder rate, you can leave the country. Well, I suppose that's what we're doing now, isn't it? In a manner of speaking.
Sadly, one of the things that I really hope will be the case, and I suspect will, I think one of the big differences in the independent Cape is all of a sudden we're going to have mass skilled immigration, but both from people returning and also coming from South Africa, and I think that'll be one of the things that absolutely drives the Western Cape economy: skilled immigration.
Absolutely. I mean, there's one thing that I've heard mentioned, and I'm not sure what your official stance on this is, and what the stance is amongst the various other groups. But I heard it suggested that under an independent Western Cape, those who are racially discriminated against by the South African, or perhaps what would be then better termed the Azanian government, would be given priority of place in immigration.
Well, I think it's something. Look, it's one of the things that that's been a discussion. I think one of the things that we have to balance, and this is one of these great points that you just have to tread very, very carefully at the time. So from our perspective, we're absolutely adamant that the independent Western Cape is going to be non-racial. And I think we've now had two regimes who have just really destroyed parts of South Africa in different ways by having this racist agenda, and actually the solution can't be to recreate either of those in the Western Cape. However, clearly there is going to be a situation. So I think let's split that up. First of all, skilled immigration has got nothing to do with that. Skilled immigration, every country in the world wants skilled immigrants because they have great value to the country, and the independent Western Cape will be no different. How do you treat conditions in South Africa where human rights violations and democracy and discrimination is on the rise? Then clearly the independent Western Cape would have to make some judgments on those. But I mean, it's not for us to decide what they are. But I think clearly the independent, everybody, whether we are coloured or black or white are going to have friends on both sides of the border, and clearly there's going to be an awful lot of sympathy for people who are suffering on the other side, and I think we're going to have to find ways of managing those circumstances in a way that's the most appropriate. I think there will naturally be, given that the ANC and the EF are committed to African nationalism, let's just say, I think there will be a natural migration of minority groups towards the Western Cape, because clearly the conditions are going to be much more conducive to a better and a safer life, and I think that will happen naturally. And in terms of policies, that I guess the government will have to develop policies at the time.
Yes, no, I think that's a very sound response. It's very thorough. Yeah, no, that's very good. I don't think there's a hell of a lot more to discuss about point, because at the end of the day, you're a single issue campaigner. There's I can't sort of ask you for a breakdown of your manifesto, but I think we managed to get a good hour of this out of you, and I'm glad that you came on our show.
Thank you, Rob. It's always a pleasure chatting to you. Yeah, very informative and knowledgeable, and a fascinating guy. And look, thank you for all of the great work you're doing with the young Cape. I mean, it's really important thing, and I think this whole concept of developing the sort of Cape culture and celebrating our history is a critical part of the whole thing.
Yes. No, thank you very much. And anyone who's wondering about this, because this warm-up series of interviews has been going on for a while, we do plan to publish the newspaper on the 20th. That's the current deadline, 20th of November. And tomorrow we have an interview. Unless any changes occur, we have an interview with J.P. Smith, the Minister of Safety and Security for the Western Cape. So hopefully a lot more interesting developments around human settlements, land invasions, land activism, crime, all of those big, hairy topics that everyone likes getting stuck into, which I'm sure everyone would have liked to ask Phil Craig, but I take it's not within his ambit. Yeah. So anything more to say to the audience, Phil?
No, listen, just thank you. Look, I see some familiar faces, and thanks, guys, for all of the support. And look, we really appreciate. Yeah, there's a really dedicated team of people who are kind of getting this forward. And look, thanks so much. It's we are making really good progress, and I think we've just got to now stay the course. The march, I guess, is the big thing for everybody now. Just, I think the critical thing, if people there want to help us, just the 5th of December, let's come march with us. Get everybody a note, come march with us. And look, we've done pretty well with our fundraising. We wanted to raise 50,000 to costs for the march. We have raised most of that, but I think we've actually got over the target. But look, funding's always an issue. So if you are able to help with something for the march, then fantastic. That would be really appreciated too.
And I understand that's on the 5th of December, and in Stellenbosch.
Stellenbosch, yes. Yeah.
In Stellenbosch, fantastic. Well, thank you, Phil, and good night, everyone.